Next in line here, we will be welcoming another really impressive figure. This session will be another enlightening testimony of what it takes to speed up defense procurement in Europe. As former Secretary of State for Defense in the UK, Ben Wallace is one of the most well-placed individuals to share insights on what can be done to rewire procurement of defense in Europe. Please welcome Ben to the stage. Huge round of applause for him. Louder than that, guys. Welcome, Ben. Welcome.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Martin and the team, for inviting me back. I attended the amazing event in Munich. I know it's almost the last session on a Thursday, so it's never always the greatest gig, but it's quite important, I think, if I can give you the oversight of how we're going to actually change all this. You know, at this event here, it is full of industry and investors and political leaders and military leaders who are excited about the future and the potential opportunities, but also go back to their own businesses or departments and find the very real challenges they face as if nothing has changed out there on the battlefield. So I thought, Martin asked me to come along, I'd give you my experience of the challenges that we need to overcome in order to really change defense procurement. Because we can have as many of these conferences as we like, we can have as many meetings of minds, but if ultimately the customer does not change, then a lot of this, I'm afraid, ends up in frustration. And in the industry I now work in investment, I constantly meet founders deeply, deeply frustrated at either the pace or the fact that their capabilities aren't being properly adopted. It is a massive missed opportunity for Europe. It's a massive missed opportunity for our constituents, and in order so that we can keep them safe. And it's not as if people don't know what to do. Sadly, because of Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, we have the very real experts on our doorstep. The Ukrainians who came to visit, they are the teachers now. They are teaching us exactly how to fight and survive both the conventional armed forces and indeed an armed forces that threatens all of us, whether it's in values or indeed in just simple hard power. And I think the first elephant in the room about reforming defense procurement is doctrine. We're not having the doctrine debate within our militaries in the same way we're having the debate within technology. Where is the doctrine conferences around Europe where militaries are challenged about how to fight tomorrow's war? There is too much going on at the bottom where we're meeting the capabilities, we're marveling at the technologies, but in the institutionalized ranks of our military, there is not much movement. And until that moves, until we decide how we're going to fight tomorrow's war, we are simply not going to be buying the equipment that we see here today. You'll see many people here, many of you in the audience will have been frustrated that you might have got a small contract or an R&D contract, but fundamentally when the Air Force or the Army sets its requirements for a larger scale contract, not much has changed. We have to drive, first and foremost, the doctrinal debate about the new way of fighting. And until that happens, I don't think you will see major shifts in what is being procured across Europe. And it's not as if the military don't know. At the one-star ranks and the colonel ranks, they know, they understand, and I think it's the job of the political leadership to make sure that we are promoting upwards a new generation of military officer who really does understand what they can see in Ukraine. I used to often ask my very senior military individuals when they'd come and lobby me to buy a platform, I'd say, how are you going to fight it? And I'd say to three-star generals or three-star admirals, how are you going to use this kit? And the silence was deafening. I remember in one very large procurement I had to buy, I summoned a captain and a brigadier because only they could articulate why I should buy 500 armored vehicles. And that's the first real elephant in the room, that we've got to have the doctrinal debate. The person I have the biggest sympathy for in the German military is the head of innovation in the Bundeswehr. Same in our system, the United Kingdom, because when innovation appears on the battlefield, it often gets parked in the experimental battalion or the experimental wing of the armed forces, because that way the admirals and generals avoid the difficult decisions of having to let go of more legacy equipment. Sometimes I used to find I was facing a culture of train spotters or steam engine enthusiasts who have never really got over the fact we have retired the steam engine in the United Kingdom. We have to change that. It is in the raw material of our men and women of the armed forces, and there are senior leaders in our militaries who do know about that. But it is the responsibility of the leading politicians to make sure they take an interest in who they are promoting and where they are put in those armed forces. And if we don't do that, I fear we'll only pay lip service. Some of the very important doctrinal changes are going to need to happen. Because what's going to help change the doctrine are what we've seen from the battlefields of Ukraine. More autonomy. Not just because autonomy is important in challenging the enemy, but also because the simple fact is, in Europe, our precious democracies and in the United States value human life much more, and we are not getting both recruits and the levels of people as we would need in our armed forces, so we're going to have to design our armed forces that is less manpower intensive, but also so we protect both the exquisite and the individual long before the enemy gets to that type of engagement. Data, understanding and embracing data and taking risk with data. The first thing the Ukrainians did just before the war was make very important decisions about the assurance levels of the data they were going to use and blend. We would still be sitting here, and we probably are all still sitting here, making sure that we only work with very assured data, top secret data, and you can't possibly blend that with ad tech data. Well, the Ukrainians did that incredibly well. We have to take some risk. The massive change is ranges. What happens when suddenly an army that I was trained in, an army I sat in North Germany as a young man, whose ranges went in basically 20 kilometers at most, maybe 30, is suddenly faced with weapon systems that can go 100, 200, 500. I met an Israeli-American company a few weeks ago, who have developed a 2,000-kilometer range strike missile for the price of $500,000. Who's going to own that in the military fight? It's not going to be the army. We don't ISR collect at that range. But who's going to do those things, and how is it going to fit in our doctrine? And then it's really important that institutionally and culturally within that doctrine, we make sure that force structure does not trump innovation, that we stop painting by numbers. We stop defining a military unit by whether it's got 3 platoons or 5 platoons or 6 platoons. We define our military units by the outcomes it's going to achieve, by the lethality it can deliver, by the readiness it has, rather than this simple painting by numbers. Now, maybe that's because when we all grow up and want to be soldiers, that's how I used to do it, and we all liked those images, but in the reality is we have to change it. The second thing is going to be the most hardest thing to change, I found as a Secretary of State, which is culture. What we are defined as in uniform, how we define ourselves, is incredibly important, but by the time we get to the end of that career or senior in that career, we have spent an awful lot of time in uniform, in an institution, thinking institutionally. I remember many times when someone changed a uniform or a bit of a uniform. One of my former Chief of the General Staff allowed beards to be worn in the army. Now, I still feel that against the culture that I was indoctrinated in, partly because in the Cold War era, you didn't have beards because of gas masks, and it was always viewed as something that it wouldn't create the seal. But to see my regiment full of people with beards is a deeply uncomfortable thing. But it's ultimately, this cultural shift is very, very important and powerful, but it leads to wrong decisions sometimes in procurement. This sense of keeping up with the Joneses, trying to keep up with the United States, who have budgets in the trillions, whereas in the United Kingdom, we simply don't. We have to learn sometimes that we can't always buy the Formula One team. We have to find another way of delivering that lethality. That's what Ukraine learned. Ukraine, beggars can't be choosers is a phrase we have in England. You can't always gold plate and get the very best. So fight it differently. That's one of the ways to survive, but also try and find your own innovation to deliver the same lethal effect. And I think that is really important. And gold plating is very, very hard to change as the culture, because often you would find the military would benchmark each other by how good your tank is. You've got a Leopard 3, I want a Leopard 3. You've got an F-35, I've got to have an F-35. Ask the question, do you? Do you really need to do that? And I think that is one of the other one. And that drives people at the moment to the exquisite always. It also drives people to be less willing to collaborate. I remember going with my Dutch counterpart. At the same time, Britain and Netherlands were going to replace their amphibious ships. And Britain and the Dutch Marines work incredibly closely together and have done for decades. We often exercise in Norway. And we decided we were going to buy exactly the same ship, the same length, the same life jackets. Nothing was to change. It's much better if you share that design by 7 or 5 or whatever the numbers were of the ship, and you get on with it. As soon as I was out the door, the questions came back. Oh, well, yeah, we want to be 100 meters longer than the Dutch ship. No, we want ours to be slightly different. And by the time I'm long out of politics, I can guarantee the British are not buying the same ship as the Dutch. That will cost more money, be basically totally pointless, and it will probably just make people feel more comfortable, but it won't do anything to deter the enemy. And I think that is one of the reasons we've got to change that culture. Otherwise, we drive away collaboration. Everyone knows the whole of Europe should have one fighter program, right? We've got the GCAP, Britain, Italy, Japan. Don't know what's happening with the French-German one. The answer is we just have one, right? I mean, everyone knows it, just politics gets in the way of that collaboration and unrealistic expectations. So I think that is another really, really important. If you want the lesson of ultimately how culture can rapidly change and must change, look at the challenges when the VDV came down the highway to Kyiv, an institutional, supposedly high-end Russian force meets an unconventional Ukrainian force. The VDV were virtually wiped out. It can be done without losing your credibility in your face. You can absolutely change who you are as well. But then we have to change the actual processes, the dreaded bureaucracy. I heard the former State Secretary earlier. She is absolutely right. The bureaucracy is stifling. Some of the bureaucracy is driven by our treasuries, our finance departments. I could have delivered a lot more for my 20 billion euro equipment budget every year if I had had a 10-year budget with more flexibility between spending on capital and revenue. And the Treasury will simply not allow it. It actually makes it for inefficient procurement. It makes us risk-averse, and it drives expense into the system. We have to reform our treasuries in how they understand and allow us, in defense, to spend those very large sums of money and deliver a project as well. The competition rules are absurd. I know we're trying to give everyone the right competition, but sometimes we dismantle whole projects simply to insert competition, and as a result, you get highly inefficient processes. Training a fighter pilot in Britain should have been a very, very easy process. I think it's got something like 6 or 7 different contractors and the different phases, which ultimately has left our fighter training program slow, inefficient, with massive choke points. Totally unnecessary, and we need to actually, again, a bit grow up about our competition rules. When I tried to change it, in would step the Treasury, in would step the lawyers. And I think we have to really take on that. And that's why it needs political leadership as well. And finally, to give you some tips to both industry and processes. Some advice, if I could give you. I now run a private equity fund as well as working with Ukrainians. And it's fascinating to see industry, investors, but also look at the customer from the other side of the table. And I think the first thing I would say to industry is work out exactly where your value is. Where is the value in your product? Sometimes people come to me and they want to be the platform builder, but actually their value is the component in it. Actually, they don't see that the platform is not unique at all. There's thousands of those around. What you really want to be is the AI chip or the propeller maker or the fan maker or whatever it is within that process. Ask yourself, do you have to make everything? Or actually, what is the value you're offering? Take time to understand the primes. They exist. They're not going to disappear tomorrow morning. They exist in defense partly because they hold risk. It's one thing to want to be leading a project, but actually when you have to carry that risk of integrating a highly complex platform, a ship or a plane, etc. The primes exist because they can carry that risk and they have the deeper pockets. And whether we like it or not, primes have the political weight. They have the shipyards, they have the workers, they have the voters. It's simple as that in many parts of the industrial base, whether we like it or not. Who is going to put their hand up in Germany and Britain and the United States and say, tomorrow we're building no more frigates, we're going to make all those thousands of people redundant in the shipyards? It's not going to happen. You can wish the world to be different, but it isn't going to happen. So we have to make sure that we understand that things like volume matters, jobs matter when it comes to the political decisions. Otherwise, politicians will not make that change to drive the cultural change elsewhere. They will be too scared to do it, thinking that it might cost them their own job as well. So not all primes are bad. Take your time to understand them if you're a startup or a small company. And ask yourself, in some contracts, you can be the supplier within the prime. And I think that is incredibly important. And it's important that the customer, the government, make sure that small and medium-sized businesses are included, that primes don't use their power to shut them out, that they actually are protected. And that's why the debate around having more open architecture in defense contracts is really important. Because as a customer, I don't like being held to ransom by primes either. I don't like being told I have to pay a lot of money to put a missile on something that I've already paid for. Another lesson of Ukraine is, at the beginning of the war in Ukraine, Britain helped Ukraine integrate missiles into certain systems. It took 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks to integrate missiles that I know, if I'd commissioned myself, would have taken 2 years and £200 million. It was remarkable what was managed to do when we put our minds to it. And for investors, understand the customer as well. Just because you have a big fund or an institutional investor, understand that your customer of the companies you're going to invest in is not retail, right? It's not a supermarket. Your customer are ministries of defense. So when founders and companies bring you a pipeline, you need to know what you're looking at. You need to understand that it's a realistic pipeline. You need to understand that the pipeline will convert into a proper addressable market at some stage, and then you can make the right calculations. And understand time, right? Nothing moves quickly in defense unless you are in a war. And what we're trying to do here is avoid a war by making sure we're fit or match fit for tomorrow, and we're going to try, all of us, I think, in Europe, and try and make it quicker, but still, it's not as quick as retail. So please, I think it's important to understand that. And dual use, if you can. Dual use is going to be one of the ways many of the companies in these halls will survive the long grind to get through to the defense market. Ultimately, if you produce something that's got a use in the civil sector or in the space sector, you will have a better survivability. It's just important to think laterally and see how you can adapt your capability to do that. That will give you other revenue streams, and I think that is incredibly important. So really, in finishing, I think what I would sum up is government and politicians and military leaders have to change the doctrine. They have to think about the doctrine and communicate it. And when they communicate those changes, then we will know whether demand signals are really going to land. That's the most important thing. If you know what the German government is going to buy next year, and the German 4-star and 3-star generals and admirals, then you'll be in a better place to know where to invest and know where to try. Understand the different markets as well. And we, the politicians and the senior civil servants, have to get a grip with the process, because if we don't grip that process, it will just suffocate all this innovation and all the excitement and the energy in places like these conferences that I come across. And that would be a very, very big loss to Europe as a whole and to our own economies and the next generation of young people coming up with these inventions. Thank you very much.